I said, here's the best part. I said, the last day of the creation story, God takes dirt from the earth and he breathes into it and he breathes life into it. I said, what we're painting with is dirt from the earth.
Mhm.
All of our pigments are dirt from the earth, and we mix a little bit of oil into it. So our job is to breathe life into it on the canvas.
Welcome to the BoldBrush Show, where we believe that fortune favors the bold. Brush. My name is Laura Arango-Bear, and I'm your host. For those of you who are new to the podcast, we are a podcast that covers art marketing techniques and all sorts of business tips specifically to help artists learn to better sell their work. We interview artists at all stages of their careers, as well as others who are in careers tied to the art world in order to hear their advice and insights. To kick off Season 9, we sat down with Thomas Torak, an oil painter who embraces the long-held principles of classical painting. Thomas shares his journey into classical painting inspired by a life-changing experience seeing Rubens' painting of the Prometheus. He discusses his mentors Frank Mason and Robert Beverly Hale, and their influence on his approach to painting focused on light, space, and form. Thomas explains his technique of building up opacity and transparency to create luminous dynamic paintings, and therefore breathing life into the canvas. He emphasizes the importance of understanding anatomy and the human form to make art more relatable. He also advises aspiring artists to study the old masters, especially through copying drawings. Our conversation highlights the joy and privilege of the creative process and the goal of connecting with viewers through impactful, emotive paintings. Welcome, Thomas, to the BoldBrush Show. How are you today?
I'm just great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to come in here and chat with you. It's not what I normally do. I should be at my easel painting, but this is going to be great.
Yes, yes. And I'm very grateful that you're you were convinced to do this. I know that you had some worries about it and you're not a big fan of doing this. So I'm very grateful that you changed your mind because I think that despite you wanting to be painting in front of your easel, you are going to be painting with your words right now. Because I think
Uh,
you are probably someone who is not probably, definitely someone who is full of a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience. And I think, in my opinion, it's going to help a lot of artists who are listening to the podcast, who are maybe looking for a little bit more of that inspiration in terms of the creative act of painting and finding their voice and all of these things that I think a lot of us go through and struggle with and doubt ourselves over. I think you can, I guess, help us commiserate.
no pressure at all. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Nah, you're gonna do amazing, amazing. Because of course we were just talking before we were recording, and I think just from hearing you talk for the past, I don't know how long we were chatting, you're amazing. You're amazing. And I'm excited to talk to you about everything creative, everything in the creative act. This episode is a little bit different, of course, because we're not going to be talking marketing, but obviously you can't have marketing and you can't have business without the art itself, right? So I think this episode is going to be dedicated to that, the creative act, the womb of everything that, we do as artists that ends up, becoming quote unquote a business or, marketing.
Yeah, marketing is fine, but if you have a masterpiece that you're trying to market, so much the better.
Exactly, exactly. You can't do anything without the art. You can
It,
intellectualize things, but
mar
it's not the same.
marketing is so much easier when you really have something that people want.
Exactly, exactly. Which is why I've got you here.
All right, so
Yeah,
so
yeah.
where should we start?
Well, we should start with telling us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Who I am? Well, I was born in a very, 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 very different time than we are living in. I was born in 1953. I was the third of six children in a middle class family, and it was an absolutely lovely way to grow up. And nowhere, I was safe, I was secure, I had lots and lots and lots of family, friends. I did well at school, everything was great. And then I graduated from high school,
Mm.
and all of my friends went away to college. And I decided not to go. It wasn't for, I didn't even take the SATs. It was not for me. And even though I was a good student, I was not interested in any academic subject to the degree that I wanted to go into tens of thousands of dollars of debt to you uh, to further that. But what I did is it gave me all of this time to think about who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. Because up until then, I was living the dream, but it was my parents' dream. It wasn't my dream. And so I had always loved drawing as a kid, and my family had no knowledge of the art world. Somebody once told me I had a culturally deprived childhood, which I thought was kind of a sweet way of putting it.
Yeah.
Uh, but I would draw and very little reaction, very little encouragement, but I loved doing it. And after all my friends went to college, I bought a few paints and I started to paint a little bit and realized I knew nothing about it. And so I decided I should learn something about painting. And because I had this culturally deprived childhood, I had never been to a museum. My parents had never been to a museum. None of my friends had ever been to a museum. So I decided I'm going to go to a museum. And I took myself to Philadelphia, which was about a little over an hour from where I lived. And do you know the Philadelphia Museum at all, Laura?
I don't, unfortunately.
Oh, well, have you seen the movie Rocky?
I have.
When when Rocky goes up this big staircase and he stands
Hmm.
at the top and looks out over the entire city and triumphant.
Yes.
That's the staircase leading up to the Philadelphia Museum.
Wow.
So you can I'll let you try and make a mental image of this.
Hmm.
I was a skinny little kid. I was always the smallest kid in my class. I was no wider than a twig, but it, well, by then it was the early 70s. Had blonde hair down to my shoulders. So imagine this skinny little kid drove myself to the Philadelphia Museum, and there's this incredible staircase in front of me. And I start climbing these stairs, and it's almost like I'm at Mount Olympus, and I am making my way up to where the gods live. And it literally turned out to be that for me. I was literally going to a place where I would meet my gods. And as I got to the top and I paid and I went in, and the first room there were some small Renaissance pieces, an altar piece. I was an altar boy. I'd seen many altars in my life that didn't interest me. And then I turned the corner and went in the next room. And literally the first painting I ever saw in my life was Rubens' Prometheus. And it is a life-size painting of Rubens tumbling upside down out of the canvas and the eagle coming in on the other side of the canvas and pecking out his liver. And I was stunned. I call it my St. Paul moment. I felt like I had been struck by lightning and I was seeing this incredible thing. And I must have gone into a trance. I was standing there, God knows how long, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I have no idea, until I realized people were staring at me. And at that point I snapped out of it but I almost felt like I was there at the scene and this was happening. And I got to witness this great punishment for Prometheus. And it was so astonishing. It was so amazing. And I decided at that moment I said, this is what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to draw and paint like this. And I didn't mean I was going to try and be Rubens. I wasn't going to paint like Rubens, but I wanted to paint with that kind of power and that kind of authority so that when people look at my paintings, maybe they'll stop for a minute and their life will be, you know, affected a little bit. And, I love it when I have, at one point last summer, I had somebody come in my studio and they were looking at paintings and they had their back turned to me. I had a still life on the floor and they were looking at the still life and they were crying.
Mm.
And I didn't know. I was talking to somebody else and finally I looked over. I said, are you okay? She said, it's just so beautiful. And that's the greatest reward you can get as an artist is that somebody is moved to tears by your work. So that was a great moment for me, and that's when I started this great journey. And then when I got back from the museum, I said, okay, how do I do this? No, I had no idea. I didn't have any guidance. There was no guidance counselor, and my parents didn't know anything. And how do I do this? And I wrote to every art school in the country that I could find, and I got brochure after brochure after brochure, and they were all pretty much the same. That it's a 4-year course, and it costs a lot of money, and you have to study uh, photography and painting and etching and printmaking and all these. You have to do all of these different things. I just wanted to paint. I didn't want to do all these other things. I just wanted to paint. And I got the catalog from the Art Students League and I looked at it, and you can go whenever you want. It was incredibly affordable. And I looked at the instructors, and they were 100 times better than anybody teaching at any of the other schools. And, I happened to come across Frank Mason in a magazine that I had read, and Frank Mason was at this school. And I said, okay, that's where I'm going. And I just, I was working in a factory at the time, and I worked for one more year, literally 1 year from the day I saw the Rubens. And then I quit and I sold my car and I moved to New York. And I knew nobody. I I literally had $2,000 in my pocket and I had two big suitcases and I didn't know anybody. I had no friends, no relatives. I didn't know a soul in the city. I had no place to stay. I just went to New York, literally just went to New York. And first thing I did was go to the Art Students League with my suitcases and sign up to take a class. And then I went to the 63rd Street YMCA. And from there I found my way. And, you know, it was a great way to start. But I promised you a story from Rubens' letters. And there's one of my favorite letters. Of course, Rubens was somebody who did incredibly well with his painting. He was not the starving artist. He did incredibly well and built a beautiful, beautiful home in Antwerp, which you can still go to.
Mhm.
And as he was building that, he wanted to have some marble busts to put, I think, around the courtyard. He wanted some marble busts around the top. And, you know, emperors and various great figures from history. And he wrote a letter. I think it was trying to remember. I think it was somebody named like Dudley Carleton or something. And so he wrote to this fellow and he said, um, I want to buy the busts that you have, and I would like to trade paintings for them. And he said, here's a list of paintings that are in my studio that are available right now, and we could make a trade. And it was just such a wonderful list because I knew all of the paintings. One was the Prometheus.
Mhm.
And he said, the Prometheus, the figure was painted by my hand, entirely by me. The eagle was by Franz Schneider's. And so there you already have an idea of how his studio worked. And he had other paintings. Some were painted by the best of my students. Some were by the best of my students, but retouched by my own hand. Some were painted entirely by me. And the last one was Daniel in the Lion's Den, which is in Washington. And it's a fabulous painting, big, beautiful, big painting. And he said it was painted entirely by my own hand. And then the part I love the best, he said, the lions were painted from life.
No.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
Oh my
And,
God.
and knowing Rubens, he probably had somebody bring lions to his studio so he could
Mhm.
study them and just let them walk around. But I thought, what an incredible thing. The lions were painted from life.
Yes.
And, how can you not love somebody like this? So,
Yeah.
so this was my goal, to learn to paint with the kind of power and the kind of authority that Rubens had. And I've spent the last 50 years studying his paintings and his technique to try and figure out what made his paintings so different from so many others.
Mhm.
And he was also a diplomat. On one trip, he went to Spain on a peacekeeping mission.
Yeah.
And while he was there, he met the young Velasquez, and Velasquez spent time with him. He was there for several months, and one of the things Rubens did while he was there, he copied every Titian that was in the king's collection. And it was the Rape of Europa and Susanna at her mirror, and various tremendous things. And it was so fascinating because he didn't copy them so that he could make them look exactly like Titian, but he was learning from Titian and yet painting with his own hand. And so that's what I wanted to do as a young 20-year-old when I landed in New York. I wanted to paint like Rubens, but I wanted to paint with my own hand. I did not want to be a little tiny Rubens, 400 years later. But uh, it's astonishing that, you know, to think that you can do a painting and some young person will come along 400 years from now and have that painting change their life is a pretty powerful thing. It's
It
pretty
is.
astonishing.
It is. It is.
So that's how I started painting.
that I love that. That was wow. That was a beautiful anecdote, to hear how you went through everything. And then of course, if I can relate deeply to that because one of my first loves, aside from Da Vinci, because I feel like a lot of us, Da Vinci is amazing, but definitely Rubens was one of the most, you just look at a Rubens and it blows your mind.
Yeah,
And then I actually got the opportunity to visit his house in Antwerp, and it's incredible. His studio is massive, and I can imagine, if he did have those lions there, he definitely had more than enough space.
yeah,
I can assure you.
yeah.
Amazing, amazing.
Well,
And yeah, he's whew,
well, I did read someplace where when he was painting in his studio, of course, it was so big, the students were also working on things at the same time.
mhm.
But when he had the Duke of Buckingham or somebody would come for their portrait sitting, they would sit for 1 hour.
Wow.
And the way it worked was uh, they would come in and the students would get them all set up, and Rubens would come in, and the students had their job was to prepare the palette for him, to grind all the paint fresh. And so he's there with a fresh palette. On the balcony, if you remember, there's a balcony in his
Yes.
studio. And on the balcony was a string quartet that was going to play as they were painting. And on the other side of the room was somebody reading Cicero. And this is the way Rubens would paint. He would have the music, he would have Cicero, he would be concentrating on his painting, he'd be having a conversation with the person. And all of these things would be going on at the same time. And it's I mean, I like to listen to music when I paint, but if somebody comes in and starts the conversation, I have to put my brush down.
Yeah, I'm the same way. That goes to show too how, you know, first off, that's kind of crazy that he had someone reading Cicero and the music because it's kind of like artists today who maybe have music playing and like a podcast going in the background or
I,
an audiobook.
yeah,
Yeah, and then to top it off talking to the sitter, wow, that it goes to show that he probably had so much muscle memory, to be able to multitask in that way.
yeah,
Because his work is
it-
just
yeah.
wow,
His
amazing.
facility is beyond anybody.
Yes.
Anybody, not
It's
to,
yep.
I I apologize to every artist listening to this, but Rubens was better than you. Rubens had this facility
Yep.
that was just so astonishing. I remember seeing a small painting that he did. It was a head of Medusa,
Yes.
and it was on a table. It was just already had been cut off, and it was on a table, and there were snakes, of course, around around the head, and they were painted with such astonishing facility. I could see the ground of the canvas. I could see the drawing of the snake. I could see the form and the character and all these things. And it was probably something that he dashed off in no time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there is a painting, maybe might be in the Louvre, of figures in a landscape dancing. Big painting, of course. And it's figures dancing in a circle. It's called the Flemish Kermis. And they're all dancing, and there's you can find some preliminary drawings that he had done for some of the figures, probably from life. And so there's this whole thing is going on. There's landscape, there's figures, there's a dog doing something in the corner, and all kinds of stuff going on. He painted that in one day, or so I've read. But his facility was so incredible
Yeah.
that I believe it.
I believe it too.
I
Um,
believe it.
yeah,
Ev-
and that's
Everything,
insane.
yeah, everything looks fresh. Everything looks like
Mhm.
he painted it in one shot. And yeah.
A true slice of life too, which is
Meanwhile, I'm spending
incredible.
4 days on a tiny little bowl of grapes, but I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's really funny because when I hear all of this, right? And it was in a time when they didn't have the luxury of photography that we have today. Um it blows my mind and it sometimes makes it feel like we're almost in the dark ages because especially, in the 20th century, so much of realism was almost lost. And one of your teachers, Frank Mason, he was definitely one of the torchbearers of
Yeah,
so much
yeah,
information that, in my opinion, there's so much more that we probably lost or haven't, been able to recover. And it's probably sitting somewhere, maybe in a book, in a flea market in the middle of
yeah,
nowhere.
yeah.
And it just amazes me
He,
so
he
much
was,
that
he
they were
was,
able.
yeah, he was one of a handful of people who kept the traditions alive,
Mhm.
through, I mean, the poor guy was trying to paint classical paintings the same time as Warhol and Jasper Johns and all these people were, making millions and millions and millions. And he said, well, he said when Peggy Guggenheim wanted her portrait painted, she came to me. She didn't go to those guys.
Yep,
So
that's how it
he
is.
said, portrait painting is always something that you can do to make a living. And he said, as long as there are two people left on the face of the earth, one is going to want the other one to paint his portrait.
Yeah.
So he said
Yeah.
that that's something that can sustain you. Meanwhile, you can paint your Daniel in the Lion's Den and all the other things you want to paint. And but he really he hung in there, you know, through
Yeah.
this you know really modern period where everything changed.
Yeah.
And gradually, he starts coming back in favor again. And he knew, he said, I knew, but you just wait for the moment to come, and you'll come back in favor. He said, It's like clothing. Don't throw anything out. So
Okay,
whatever you wore in the 60s will come back in the 90s, and
for sure.
and you'll be ahead of the curve because it will have already been broken in. It won't look like you just bought it. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's very commendable too to have lived through the 20th century as a realist painter, because I feel like the only realist painters who really did really well for themselves in terms of being more accepted were illustrators, in my opinion, who
Mhm.
also were torchbearers in their own way. But the true to itself classical painter, I find, struggled the most. They were definitely starving artists in the 20th century compared to, like you said, like the Warhol people and the Picasso people, and the more modern movement.
Yeah.
So it's
Not to
incredible.
not to disparage them,
Oh no, of
I,
course.
I I you know I owe a lot of my brushwork to the abstract expressionists.
Exactly. Yes.
And even though I'm painting light and shade and space and all these other things, I learned color from the impressionists.
Yeah.
I mean, they had colors that Rubens didn't have.
Hmm.
Imagine Rubens with cadmiums.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Or Titian, with a phthalo green. I mean, just they just didn't have anything. They didn't have any yellows to paint a
Hmm.
landscape, and yeah, I mean, it's just astonishing. So there were still things to be learned from everybody, and
Oh, of
I
course.
appreciate every school of painting,
Yeah.
but but classical painting is what I love,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
you know, it, it's nice that Pavarotti wants to have concerts with whoever, all the pop singers that come along, but you know, put him on a stage with Morella Freni and have them do Bohème, and my heart breaks.
Yeah.
And it doesn't when he's singing with Bono or somebody, I, you know, I there's no thrill for me.
Yeah.
So it's just the world I live in. It's just my choice. My taste, my choice.
Yes. Yeah. And I completely agree with that. I do find that everything has a right to exist, right? Everyone has a right to enjoy what they enjoy. And of course, I'm referencing, of course, the starving artist in the 20th century classical painter, because that's how it was, regardless of whether or not it was good or bad or etc. Because that is exactly what happened. And also that, like I mentioned earlier, that loss of information, that
Mhm.
loss of teaching that happened, it it does feel like a bit of dark ages for classical painting itself, right? Of course, all painting is derivative, right? So all of these modernists, they were derivatives of classical painting as well. So there's value in it. Without, like you said, disparaging other forms of art that can exist and will continue to exist, because that's how it is. Um, and I actually wanted to ask you, because you have years of experience doing this, and you've had a lot of time to create your process and recreate it many times over. What is your process like from idea to finished painting?
Well, you know, because I have a philosophy of painting,
Mhm.
it was a great help to me. I think one of the problems that most artists have is they don't know what they want to paint or how they want to paint it. And I knew from the time I saw the Prometheus
Mhm.
how I wanted to paint. And I was fortunate that when I went to the Art Students League, I had these two great mentors. One was Robert Beverly Hale. I
Okay.
got to hear his lectures maybe just a couple of years before he passed away. But I learned a tremendous amount, not just about anatomy, but um, well, I don't have anything to say about marketing, but I will give some advice to young artists that are out there. There's only one book in the world that I recommend to anybody, and it's The Drawing Lessons from the Great Masters by Robert Beverly Hale. And, you know, I love it because what he does in that book is he teaches you how to think like an artist. And he would often say during his lectures, a layperson will see this part of the anatomy this way. An artist will see it as a form. He'll see it as an egg, or he'll see, and he'll light it that way. And I love that idea of thinking like an artist. So I had Robert Beverly Hale, and then shortly after that, um, Frank Mason. And I kind of married the two together just by instinct. And what most people do is they want to learn to draw first until they feel like they've mastered drawing and then move on to painting. And it probably works for some people, but Frank's teacher, a fellow named Frank Vincent Dumond, uh, got very frustrated. And Frank told me these stories. I used to work in his studio, so he would tell me these stories. And he said Dumond would get very frustrated because people would be in George Bridgman's class and they could draw like anybody. He said they were master draftsmen. And then they'd come up to my class and they put these beautiful drawings down and they start to color them in. And he said, that's not painting, that's coloring. And he said, there's a difference. And he had to walk them back before he could get them to go forward again. And just sort of by instinct, I did not master drawing before I started painting. And I got to learn the two, and I got to marry the two together in a very organic way. So that was a great thing. And one of the other things about Frank Mason is that he not only taught painting, but he also taught the craft. So he would teach you how to prepare canvas, and he would teach you how to prepare mediums. And most people wouldn't do it. Most people would just, they'd run down to the store, they'd buy a canvas, and they'd come up and start painting. And I I said, well, imagine you're a violinist and you're playing at Carnegie Hall. I said, you don't want to run down to the pawn shop just before your concert and grab a violin to play at Carnegie Hall. That if you're going to do a masterpiece, you should do it on a piece of canvas that is worthy of the masterpiece. And so Frank taught me all that, and I worked in his studio. And at the League, we were all painting all the time. It was great. But when I worked in his studio, I would help him prepare canvas, and I would help him frame things for shows and create them. So I was learning how to do all of these different things. And I even helped him when he had clients come to the studio. When I first started going down to his studio, he would paint upstairs. He lived upstairs on the top, and he had a beautiful he made his own skylight. He punched a hole through the ceiling and made a skylight. And downstairs was the storage and where we did the framing, and we made all the noise and made all the sawdust and did all the bad things. But he had a lot of his paintings stacked down there, and they were just stacked against the wall. And and my job, as he was talking to the client and telling them stories and being very romantic, my job was to move the paintings that were in the stack so that the poor client could see them, and they're stacked. I thought, this is just awful. And I said, this is a terrible way to look at paintings. And so a few years later, I got together with a friend of mine who was a brilliant carpenter, and we built big hanging racks. So now when you go into his studio, there's a big wall. It's maybe 5 by 10 feet, and it's just pegboard stacked with paintings, and you pull it out, and then you look on the other side, and it's really beautiful. Yeah, but I got to be with him while he was with clients, and that was such an education, to understand that, yes, you're the painter, but you talk about marketing and sales, and how do you sell? And he lived on the fourth floor of a building in Little Italy with no elevator. So you had to climb stairs. There are 90 stairs, 89 stairs. I counted them once. There are 89 stairs to get to his studio. And Frank also played the piano when he was young. He was a child prodigy, and he had to give up music because he was dyslexic and he had a hard time reading the music. So he would mostly just, improvise. And so when he had a client come, they would ring the bell and he would send me downstairs to open the door for them. And I'd go down and meet them and greet them, and we'd start climbing up the stairs. And as we're climbing, in the distance, you hear this piano playing. And, so we go up, we're at the second floor, and the music gets a little bit louder and louder. And finally we get to the top, and I open the door to the loft, and there's the artist himself sitting at the piano playing something that sounds somewhere between Brahms and Rachmaninoff, and he's just making it up as he goes along. And his studio, uh, he had some old casts, things that were cast from the original. He had the Venus de Milo cast from the original, and that was in one side of his studio. And on the other side, he had the Winged Victory from the Louvre, the big Nike, and that was behind the piano. So you walk into this loft, beautiful brick walls, gorgeous paintings everywhere, the artist sitting at the piano, the Winged Victory behind, and I could just see the money flowing out of them. It's like, I want to be a part of this. And he created this atmosphere where, you know, he had completely brought the client into his world. And, I just thought, what an amazing thing. And, you know, it brought somebody up once. This is kind of a side story, but I like it
Mhm.
because it involves me.
Yeah.
And so I brought the client up, and next to the front door, he had uh, these tables, these drawers for drawings, and they were stacked up quite high, about 6 feet high. And on the top, he had a photograph of Frank Dumont. He revered his teacher, and and so the client's there, and we're standing by the door chatting, and the client sees the picture and says, "Oh, is that your father?" And Mason says, "No, that was my teacher. That was Frank Vincent Dumont. He was my teacher." And then he put his arm around me and he said, "And it was Tom's grand teacher."
Oh.
So so I've always thought of Dumont as my grand teacher, and
Mhm.
anybody who studied with him was an aunt or an uncle. So uh, Uncle Norman Rockwell and all
Yeah.
these great. Everybody studied with Dumont because he taught for 50 years.
Yeah.
He taught for 59 years, literally. And poor Frank was disappointed when he had to stop teaching because he had only taught for 57. He said, "I wanted to teach as long as Dumont, and I can't do it."
Oh.
But
Oh, wow.
but that was, a great part of what I learned. So at the league, I was learning to paint. I was learning to be a painter and working from the model and doing all these great things. And then when I was in Mason's studio, I was learning what it was like to live the life of an artist. And the way Frank would teach was by example. So when he was giving critiques in the classroom, he would just work on your painting. He would take the brush, and there was the model in front of you, and he would use your palette, and he would say, this is, you need to go here and you need to go there and do this. And then he would start telling stories, and he would continue painting, and you just watched him paint. And I did the same thing in his studio. I would just watch him live, and what it's like to live the life of an artist is something that you don't get out of art school. What is it like when, how do you get up in the morning? How do you get started? How do you do this? How do you get clients? How do you do all these different things? And so I was really incredibly lucky that I had these two incredible mentors. And At some point, I left the class. I kept working at Frank's studio, but I left the classroom and he said, "You weren't in class today." I said, "Frank, I have things I want to paint." I said, I don't want to just paint whoever the office sends up to be the model that week. I have things I want to paint." And he said, "Great." He got it. He said, "That's, that's what he wants me to do. He wants you to be an artist." And I think he was kind of pleased that I didn't want to just stay there forever. And so then started my own journey and you start thinking, what do I want to paint? How do I want to paint it? And, I was given all these skills. Now, what do I do with them? And I sort of love that time. Some of my favorite paintings are from that time. And not that they're the best paintings, but, you know, I can remember thinking, I set up a still life and I said, how can I do a painting of essentially dark objects in rim light? You it was a challenge for myself. How do I do that without making just this horrible dark painting? And I always loved that painting. And, I did it and I learned something. And so you're always learning all the time as an artist. But one of the things that Frank did was the craft. So he taught me. So this is how I do a painting. I said my painting starts with I pick out a piece of linen and I have some things that people gave me. I have some leftover scraps from Frank's studio when he passed away and I have all kinds of things. I have a a linen from Utrecht. It's just your basic commercial Utrecht art supplies linen, which I like. It my brush reacts very nicely to it. So I find a piece of linen that you like, and then I prepared it the way the old masters did, with the rabbit skin glue and the white lead. And fortunately, I live in Vermont, so I have a barn. I can do it outdoors. It's much harder when you live in New York City. You can't prepare 80 canvases with white lead and leave them in your apartment while you're sleeping.
It's true. That's dangerous.
It, it's instant lead poisoning.
Yeah.
Um, but I always found a way. When I did live in New York, I always found a way to get out of the city for a month and rent a house upstate somewhere and prepare the canvases while I was upstate and do some landscape painting. And you can always find a way. But that's how I started, is preparing my own canvas. And one of the things that I love doing is putting a ground on the painting. And a lot of artists like to paint on a white canvas. A lot of people say you should never do anything but work on a white canvas. And if you go to the Tate in London and you look at the Turners were all started on white grounds. And I happen to like a toned ground because a big part of what I'm doing is painting luminosity. And in order to do that on a white ground, you have to cover up the white ground with paint so that you can then get to the luminosity. When you have a middle tone, you can, within the first minute or two, I generally start out just by finding the rhythm of my composition and then going right into the light and the luminosity and the canvas starts to bloom right from the beginning. And you're not waiting till the end to put the highlight on. If I want to put the highlight on the first stroke, I can do that.
Mhm.
And so you can do all of these really amazing things. And when I moved to Vermont, one of the things I discovered was moonlight. I lived in New York City. I lived in New York City for 20 years. And when I came to Vermont, there's no street lights. You know, I can't see my neighbors' houses unless I really struggle, and far off in the distance, about maybe half a mile up the road is the next house. And when I take the dog out at night, there's the moon. And I love painting the moon so much. I did an entire show of just nocturnes. I did 21 nocturnes as a tribute to Chopin. Chopin wrote 21 nocturnes, so I thought I'll paint 21 nocturnes and do a show. And it was great. I've never seen anything like it. But one of the things I learned as I was doing that, when I would start doing the nocturnes, I like to use a, an umber ground, and I just mix it with some rabbit skin glue. After the lead is dry, I sand it a little bit so the glue will grab it, and I just sprinkle a little bit of dry color on the canvas, and then put the glue on and spread it out, and it makes this beautiful tone. It's the kind of thing you can see in Rubens. Rubens used to use a raw sienna, and you see it in a lot of his studies for big paintings. You can see the ground. And I like umber. I like something just almost a little bit more neutral. The sienna is just a little too yellow for my taste. And when I was doing the nocturnes, I couldn't get them to sing. I'd go out at night and I would look and I would make mental notes and I'd come down the next morning in my studio and then I would paint what I remembered. And I couldn't get it to sing. And I kept thinking, why? Why is this not working? See, this is part of the beauty of growing. And I realized that when I'm doing my still lifes or my portraits or some other things, the liveliness is all in the painting itself. It's all on the top, all the richness of the color, all the intensity, everything is there on top. So the neutral ground works great because it's not competing. But when I was doing the nocturnes, you're using very muted tones. It's dark blues and dark violets and dark greens in the trees, and everything is very, very low in pitch and also in uh, intensity. And the whole painting sort of looked dead. And then you had this sort of whitish moon. It just looked awful. And I said, "There's no liveliness." I said, "Where's I need to get liveliness." And just on a whim, I decided to tone a canvas with phthalo green. Very intense color. Very, very intense color. And and then I started painting on that. And when I started letting some of that phthalo green come through the darks of the trees, it just worked like a charm. First one I did was a painting of fireflies. And so it's just a dark mass of trees with just a few little fireflies glowing in front. But I painted the trees in a way where I let some of that green come through, and not so much that it looks like an intense phthalo green, but just enough to make the dark look lively. And it was great. It was just great. So from there I painted lots and lots and lots of nocturnes, and
Mhm.
I've tried phthalo blue and I've tried all different kinds of things, but you know, for the Vermont landscape, the phthalo green works great.
Wow.
And so this is my process is to do prepare the canvas and put the ground on, and each of these things is a part of the painting. And I did a little demo at my gallery, and they filmed it and they made a little 5-minute clip of it. And I noticed that as I was talking and introducing what I was doing to the audience, I was also rubbing my hand on my canvas, unconsciously in the background. I was just making a connection to this canvas. And I have done it in my studio. I didn't realize I was doing it in public, but I was just making a connection so that when I started the painting, there was already a connection between myself and the canvas itself. And I wasn't just uh, pulling out some thing that was on the shelf and taking off the plastic and starting painting. I knew this canvas already. I had raised it from being a raw linen, to adulthood where it was a canvas ready for a painting. And I love that idea of having the connection between yourself and the painting, and I often grind. You can see behind me, there's tons of dry color.
Mhm.
Uh, I often grind my own paints so that you have fresh paint every day. And, so it takes a little while, but, you know, it's a way to meditate, and it's a way to think about what I'm going to be painting. And, you know, again, you're becoming one with your color. So everything becomes very organic. You have a connection to your paints, you have a connection to your canvas, and you're all working together to create this great masterpiece. And there are companies now that make some very good paints. There are some very good. There weren't when I was a child. It was all commercial paint for Aunt Betty, and not that I don't love Aunt Betty, but she doesn't really need hand ground paints. Uh, but now they make some very good quality paints. Um, but I have enough dry color here for probably 4 lifetimes. Um, so this is all before I even start painting. And I did a demo at the league. They had it was a very odd experience. They they needed my studio. I had a skylight studio at the league, and they had somebody from a department store that wanted to do a photo shoot in there for some ungodly reason. And the director of the league, who was a very good friend of mine, came up and he said, they're offering us so much money, I've got to let them do this. And he said, I need your studio for 2 days. He said, can you take your class up to the museum and do a talk or something? And I had just been to the museum like a month ago. There was a big show of somebody from the Ashcan school, I think Bellows, and we had gone and we had looked at the show, and I said, Ira, we just went up. I said, what if I do a demo in the gallery? And I went down to the league gallery, and he said, great, we'll open it up to the whole school. Anybody who wants to come can come. I said, fine. I said, can I do it for 2 days? I said, I've never done a 2-day demo before. And he said, absolutely. So I set up, and one of the students posed for me, uh, and I started talking. And again, my hand is rubbing on the canvas, and I start talking, and start explaining. I said, before I start painting, you need to know how I'm thinking. And I said, before I start my painting, I know I want to do something with light and space and form. I want to paint something that is an illusion in space. So in my mind, what I do before I start painting, I imagine my canvas as an empty space. Said most artists will imagine it as a flat surface because it is a flat surface. But I start, with my imagination before I even touch the palette. So my canvas is an empty space. And instead of building on a flat surface, what many artists will do, and this comes out of um, a lot of the commercial schools of painting, and they do some beautiful work. Um, what they do is they start on a flat surface and they start to build on the surface, and they start to create form in that way. And then gradually, as they start painting, tonally, they start going into space. They start creating aerial perspective. And I said, I don't do that. I start out in space. So I'm doing exactly the opposite of what many other artists are doing. I'm starting out in space, and I'm having my figure emerge out of that space, almost like Birth of Venus. There she is, fully formed, coming out of the sea, and until she's presented before you. And And I kind of love that idea. It just slowly emerges, and it it works great for me. For other people, they need a step-by-step process. I don't have a step-by-step process. I let the figure emerge. Some people need to have a step-by-step process in order to get from beginning to end. And that's fine. You can do a beautiful painting that way. It's not for me. So, I everybody has to find their own way of how they create a masterpiece. And so this is my way. And where was I going with this? I was moving from beginning to end, and it just and people say, when do you know a painting is finished? So when do you know a painting's finished? And my general answer is when you say everything you've had to say about the subject. If you say it in 1 hour, then it's done. You know, if it takes you a very, very long time to express everything you have to say about that particular subject, then that's how long it takes. And, when you're doing landscape painting, you can't stay out there for 6 hours and copy the landscape. It just doesn't happen, especially sunrise. You've got maybe 20 minutes before the sun is up and you're in full morning light. And, so there are times when you paint fast by necessity, but there are other times when you just paint quickly. And I had one painting many, many, many years ago. I had bought an earthenware pot with some braided something around it. It was like braided reeds or something soft. And it was just a wonderful thing. I just wanted to buy it. And I brought it home, and I wanted to paint it, but I didn't have a painting in mind. And I just happened to have some peaches in the kitchen, and I grabbed a white cloth and I threw them together and I did this painting. And it happened to be a time where everything was just right. The canvas was right, the paint was right, the paint was fresh, the humidity was just right. Everything was there working together. And it's only happened to me 3 or 4 times in my life where I'm painting with such ease because everything, I remember thinking in the middle of the painting, I'm just going to grab some weird color and put it on here and see if it works because everything is working so beautifully. I didn't do it, but everything just flowed so beautifully and so easily. I finished the painting in 4 hours, and that was all I needed. I may have come back the next day and put a little glaze on a peach or something, but you know, I was able to say what I wanted to say easily. And luckily I did, because the next day I started another painting and the humidity was different and some of the paint was a day old, and everything was different, and you know I it would have made a different painting out of what I had started.
At BoldBrush, we inspire artists to inspire the world because creating art creates magic, and the world is currently in desperate need of magic. BoldBrush provides artists with free art marketing, creativity, and business ideas and information. This show is an example. We also offer written resources, articles, and a free monthly art contest open to all visual artists. We believe that fortune favors the bold brush. And if you believe that too, sign up completely free at boldbrushshow.com. That's BoldBrush show.com. The BoldBrush Show is sponsored by Faso. Now more than ever, it's crucial to have a website when you're an artist, especially if you want to be a professional in your career. Thankfully, with our special link, faso.com/podcast, you can make that come true and also get over 50% off your first year on your artist website. Yes, that's basically the price of 12 lattes in 1 year, which I think is a really great deal considering that you get sleek and beautiful website templates that are also mobile friendly, e commerce, print on demand in certain countries, as well as access to our marketing center that has our brand new art marketing calendar. And the art marketing calendar is something that you won't get with our competitor. The art marketing calendar gives you day by day, step by step guides on what you should be doing today, right now, in order to get your artwork out there and seen by the right eyes so that you can make more sales this year. So, if you want to change your life and actually meet your sales goal this year, then start now by going to our special link, faso.com/podcast. That's FASO.com/podcast. Yeah.
And, you know, I like the idea. So kind of you to let me just ramble on like this.
Oh,
But
I like I
but
said, you are leading this little boat. You are the navigator.
but I remember a student once talking to me, and she was painting in the back of the room. And she had this same problem. She started the painting on Monday, and Tuesday she said everything was different. And I came in on Thursday. I used to teach on Monday and Thursday, and the students would paint all 5 days. And so she said every day when I came in, everything looked different and the paint felt different. Everything was different. How do you deal with that? And I said, that's such a brilliant observation. And I said, everything is different. I said, when you were painting on Monday and you put everything away, you went out and you had dinner with somebody, you had conversations, you did this and you did that. The model had a life. They went out and they did things. And each time you do that, you're a little bit changed by your experience. You know, every moment of every day, you're a little bit different. So by the time you came in on Tuesday, you had had different experiences, and you were happy or sad because of what had happened, and the model was different because of what they had gone through, and the air was different because it, weather changes. And I said the light might have been different if it's a cloudy, even though you have a skylight, if it's a cloudy day or a clear day, the quality of the light is different. And I said, that's, such a profound thing to know about your painting. And I said, you have to make a decision. So this is why you don't just copy what you're looking at, is because everything is different. And I said, when you start a painting, you have to have some vision of what you want it to be at the end. And I said, when I'm painting a still life and I have fruit in it, I have some grapes. And the first day you set it up and the grapes are all juicy and they're fresh and they're new and the highlights are crisp and they almost have some moisture to them. Each day that grape dies a little bit and it dies a little bit. And by the third or fourth day, you're working on your still life, the highlights are quite dull and everything is just a little sadder. And I said, if you just copy it, you're going to end up with a very sad still life every time because these things are, unless you're Morandi and you're just painting jugs and things that don't die. But if you're painting anything that's alive, you're trying to paint flowers. I tried doing tulips once and I set them up the first day and there they were, all beautiful and moving. And I came back the next day, the entire still life had turned to my window. Every one of the flowers had turned as if they were all turning their head to get to the light. And what I had to go back to where I was the first day. So when I'm doing that, I said, when you're painting, you have to remember what it is you want to paint. And if you were excited the first day, paint the grapes the way they were the first day. Don't paint them the way they are the fourth day. And you'll find some things will happen. And I did another painting with some nasturtium. And nasturtium is not the kind of thing you normally put in a vase, but we grow a lot. We have a lot of land here, so we plant some flowers and fruit and various things. And I clipped off some nasturtium, and they were beautiful, flowing, wonderful, fabulous. They also go towards the light, but each of the flowers only lives for one day. So even if it's turning toward the light, that one's going to die and another one will open up. And so as I was painting, there would be a beautiful red nasturtium here on one day. The next day it would be gone, and a beautiful golden nasturtium would be open another place. And the whole still life kept evolving as I was painting. And it was the most wonderful thing in the world. And so I just followed it where it was going. And it turned out to be a wonderful painting. And so I love that kind of thing. I did some restoration in the morning when I was a student. I worked for a restorer. My job was to do the in painting where paint had flaked off. And there was a painting once of irises. It was purple irises. Small painting, not very big. And as I was looking at it, I realized the artist only had one flower. And he painted it at each different stage of its development each day over 5 days. And because I could see where he was painting over things, and so there he was. He was sitting in his studio with one little flower, and he made this beautiful little bouquet out of it. And it was beautiful because it was the entire story from being a little bud to opening up and developing and becoming this full flower. It was a whole life story of this flower, and it was a beautiful thing. So this is my process. I develop things and I let them open up. Oh, so I was I started out with the demo I was doing at the league.
Mhm.
So I started out on the first day, and I'm explaining how I start. And I start talking about the canvas being an empty space. And I had the model leave, and I turned on, it was downstairs, so we had to use an electric light. I turned the light off, and I said, this is how your painting develops. This is how your subject matter develops. I said, first you have this empty space. I said, it's very much like the creation story in the Bible. You start out with a void. You start out with nothing. And it's not a flat void. It's a void. It's an empty space. So if you think of your canvas as this big empty space, and then God separates the light and the darkness, and you turn the light on, and there's light flowing into that space. And I said, now you have light and space. And then I had the model come. I said, God created the animals and the trees. And I had the model take the model stand. And I said, this is what happens. The light, as the model invades that space, it occupies that space and moves all the molecules around. And the light falls on the model. This is what you're painting. You're painting light on a form in space. You're painting those three things. You're not just painting, Walter's portrait. You're painting these things that happen. And then I said, here's the best part. I said, the last day of the creation story, God takes dirt from the earth and he breathes into it, and he breathes life into it. I said, what we're painting with is dirt from the earth.
Mhm.
All of our pigments are dirt from the earth, and we mix a little bit of oil into it. So our job is to breathe life into it on the canvas. And this is what our mission is to take this dirt from the earth. And so every day that you paint, you're recreating the creation story. And I said, if you can breathe life into it on the canvas, people will react. If it's a portrait, they'll start talking to it. If it's a still life, they're going to want to pick it up and eat it. If it's a landscape, they're going to want to walk through it, and it will be something that the viewer can have a connection to. So I was talking like this for 45 minutes before I ever touched the canvas. And they sat there listening, and there must have been 200 students, and some of them were from my class, but some were from other parts of the league. And I started just after lunch, so I thought, well, they'll listen to 5 minutes and they'll go back to their class. And they didn't. They all sat and watched. And then I started working on the portrait and letting it evolve. And then I came back the next day and I said, this is how you develop a painting. Now that you have, a sense of the character, this is how you develop it. And spent the second day developing the character. And I I was just sort of lost in the painting. And at some point somebody came up to me and said, you need to stop because we have to do the evening class. And we have to set up the chairs for a lecture tonight. And so I stopped painting and I turned around and I got this tremendous ovation. And all the students had stayed. They had given up 2 days of their own painting to watch this. And it was a joy to do it. And so I went down, I told Ira, I said, Ira, it worked out okay. I said, now can I have my studio back? I want my skylight back.
Yes.
But that idea of light and form and space is so powerful. And it's the one thing that I found most difficult about teaching was to teach people how to see, because they think they see somebody wearing a red sweater
Mhm.
and they start painting somebody wearing a red sweater, and they've taken no notice of the light, they've taken no notice of the space, they're only seeing the form. And I said, you're seeing the easiest thing. The form is easy to see because the light is uh, exposing the form for you. You're seeing the light and the shade. It tells you what the form is. But the light is so incredible. It has a character of its own. I said, imagine if we had the same model and we stayed here for 24 hours and we painted here with the skylight until it got dark. And then we decided, oh, we want to keep painting through the evening. And you turn on an electric light, even if it's coming from the same direction, it's a different kind of light. It has a different quality, a different character. And then, if we get into the late night and I turn out all the lights and we paint by moonlight. And it's the same model, the same person in the same pose, wearing the same costume. Now we're painting moonlight and it has another quality of its own. So, the model has a character, the light has a character. And then I said, we haven't even gotten to the space yet. And the space has a character of its own. And, it makes a huge difference if we're painting in New York City in the winter and the heat is on and it's very dry, or we're painting in New Orleans in the summer and it's very sultry and very hot. The air has a lot more water in it. The air is very different. You can see this when you do landscape painting so easily. When you start out, there were many times I went out and I couldn't see anything. It was just mist. So there was just nothing but water in the air. And then as the sun started to rise, the mist starts to lift and the quality of the space changes. And then finally, when you have the full sunlight, it's just a totally wild, different thing than it was when you started out in the mist. And it's not that the subject has changed. The light has changed, yes, but the air has changed tremendously. And so now the air in the room, the air in your painting has a character and a personality. And, so now you're painting all three things that you're seeing. When you look at the model, you're seeing the model sitting at a certain distance in front of the wall. So if she's 3 feet in front of the wall, then you see the light passing behind and coming out on the shadow side of the head, and it's quite beautiful. She moves back a little bit, and there's less light coming behind her head. And then she presses all the way against the wall. There is no light, and the shadow is directly against the shadow side of the head, and they mass into this great dark. And that space, if you don't explain it to the viewer, then you haven't explained what you're seeing. So when somebody says, I want to paint what I see, I said, what do you see? I see when I saw the Prometheus, I saw his head coming forward, and his feet kicking up into the air in the back, and I saw the landscape going off in the distance, and the eagle flying in and turning its head to peck out the liver, and the eagle was flying in space, and there was this thing I love about Rubens is that he paints luminosity, and painting luminosity is different than painting light tones and shadow tones. Light and shade are wonderful. They're tones. So you're painting light and shade. So you're painting literally what falls on the model. So you're doing a painting of light and shade. Luminosity is different. We always say the moon is so luminous. And the moon doesn't have any light at all. You have the sun falling on the moon. And if you just paint that, then you're painting the light on the moon. But it's luminous because the light comes back to your eye. And the fact that the light comes back to your eye is what makes Rubens so much different than the entire 19th century. And they did some beautiful things in the 19th century, but Rubens has the light bouncing off of the paint and back to your eye. And I said, you can do this on your palette. I said, just take some white paint and make a little square on your palette with the white paint and do it. Put a lot of medium in it so it looks transparent. So you can see the palette right through the white. And then do another square next to it that's a little more opaque, so you can't see the palette anymore. And then put a third square next to that where the paint is really thick and really heavy and really powerful. And then look at these three whites. It's the same white that you've used for all three. The one with the greatest opacity looks the most brilliant because the light is bouncing back to your eye. And that makes when you look at a Rubens, his highlights are, probably a foot thick. They're not a foot, but that's the greatest opacity in the painting. And when you're looking at the Prometheus, you can see these tones. And I love, once I understood this, he would paint from light to dark, and he would go from opacity to transparency. And I would look at some paintings, and I would just look at a forearm that he had of a figure. And he would go from this tremendous opacity where the light was and come back through the color of the middle tone and into the transparency of the shadow. And it was literally, as I said before, like he was breathing on the canvas. I couldn't see the brushwork going from one place to another. It was as if he just breathed on the canvas and this thing appeared. And it's so astonishing and so powerful. And when I looked at it, I saw a human arm. I didn't see any technique. I saw a human arm. But being a student, I'm trying to analyze what I'm looking at. And it's such a powerful thing. And it disappeared for a long time. He developed this idea of transparency in the shadows. Titian would do it with glazes on top. Rembrandt would do it with some thinner paint on top. Rubens really developed this idea of using opacity and transparency. And, my teacher sort of rediscovered it just before I came to New York. He had learned from Dumont, he had learned a tonal way of painting. And he did some beautiful, beautiful things. And as he was painting, he was doing the same thing I was doing. He was looking at the Rubens and saying, why is this different? And this is why he was the right teacher for me, because were both thinking the same way. And it's not that I adopted his thinking, it's that we were both in sync right from the beginning. And in 1973, he did a self-portrait where he was wearing a big beret. It was very romantic. And he did these big opacities in the light and let the shadows be transparent. And it was beautiful. And he continued playing with this idea all the time. And we thought about it, and I thought about it. And after he passed away, I kept thinking about it. And as I started teaching, I'm trying to explain it to the students, why this is so important. And I finally realized one day that what he was doing, he was echoing what happens in nature. And as I was in the classroom, I was looking at um, the easel at the league. The student had their painting on the easel, and it had a wooden clamp, and it had a metal screw through it. And I said, the light is falling on this clamp evenly on the wood and on the metal. Why does the metal have a bigger highlight than the wood does? And it was because of the density of the metal that it reflected the light back. And so he was doing, the wood was softer, so it had less of a reflection coming back to the eye. Still had a highlight, but it wasn't anything like the metal. And I, as I was doing that, I was realized he's echoing what nature does. So as you make your paint denser, as you build it up and make this great opacity, what you're doing is creating a circumstance where the light can bounce off of the paint and back to your eye with more authority than it does on the less opaque areas. And then when you get to the shadows, so now I have to think, why is he using transparency in the shadows? And it made perfect sense because a shadow is the absence of light. So in the absence of light, he also creates the absence of paint. And you have to put something, you need some tone on there in order just to so you don't just have the bare ground, because the light will bounce off of the ground back to your eye with a certain intensity too. But he does it very transparently. So when you look at that arm, the light is bouncing back in a powerful way off of the biggest light and not bouncing back at all through the shadow. And he's really, echoing nature, but redoubling the effect of the light and the shade that you're putting on the painting. So he's creating this incredible dynamic, and it just seems to me, it just seems so natural and so beautiful that I can't imagine any other way of painting anymore. And sometimes when you're doing landscape studies, you've got 20 minutes to get the sunrise, and you don't worry about all that stuff. You just get some color notes down there. But it's such a beautiful, such a powerful way of thinking. And as I was trying to explain space one day, this is the beauty of teaching, is it forces you to verbalize everything. And Mason just did it by having you watch him, and he would say, I paint and you learn, and watch what I do, and then you'll learn. I felt like I had to explain it to people, why I was doing this. And so I took the example of the easel again. And I said, as we're painting this, I said, you can put your hand over the back of the easel. You can put your hand in space. You can go right around it. And I started thinking about edges, and artists love edges. Edges is just, a chapter in every book. People love edges. And, I've always had a problem with it because I was having difficulty making things move in space when there was a sharp edge on something. And I had to create for myself a way of thinking so that I wasn't just painting what I was seeing. I had to explain to myself what the edge of the easel was. And I developed the idea as I was doing floral painting. And I came up with the idea that even though in the dictionary, an edge is where something disappears from your eye. And I've changed that definition for myself. And I made an edge where two planes meet. So where two planes meet, there's an edge. So I looked at the front of the easel, and there was the top of the the ledge where you put the painting, and then there was the front. And between the two, there was planes meeting. And there was a little highlight where those planes were meeting. And that was then we went back to the, across the the ledge of the easel, and we went behind the painting to where the ledge met the upright of the easel. And I said, this is also an edge. This is an interior edge. This is where two planes are meeting inside of a box. The other was two planes meeting on the outside of a box. One had a highlight, the other has kind of a dark accent to it. And where planes meet, wonderful things happen. But then what do you do when planes aren't meeting? What do you do when you're painting a flower and it's floating in space? And yes, the flower stops, the color stops, the light stops, everything stops, and then there's space behind it. And I started referring to that as a turning plane, where you're not just meeting another plane, but you're actually turning into space. And so as I was doing that, I could develop more of a spatial concept in my mind by doing that. So as I was mixing my colors, I was thinking that it's not just this color against that color, it's this color against the space behind it. And I started painting with more distance. And I realized that the only edge in this entire floral was where the vase was meeting the table. That was the only edge in the entire, everything else was floating in space. Even the stems and the leaves and everything, every part of the painting was moving in space. And when I thought of them as moving from form to a turning plane, it just created a mental space for me to then not paint an edge. And if I painted the two tones next to each other, you start nailing that flower to the wall. You start, once you create an edge, now you have two planes meeting. Now the flower is meeting the plane behind it. And it was so helpful. And it's very hard I can explain it to you because you're a great painter. You know what you're doing. Um, I, but that concept is just such a beautiful thing. And so I don't want to go on and on and on. We've probably been doing this for 2 hours already. Um, but that's generally my approach to painting is light and space and air and making things as absolutely beautiful and glorious and luminous as they can possibly be. And when I see my paintings in shows with other paintings, I do a lot of juried shows, and I look and it's just I feel like a freak of nature, because it looks so different than the way everybody else is painting. Not that there aren't other beautiful paintings in the show, and other things are winning awards and doing, but it just looks so, so, so different. And one of my dreams is to go to a museum where they don't hang things chronologically. And you could see a Van Dyke next to a Whistler, and a Whistler next to a Fragonard, and Fragonard next to George Innes, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything. They just sort of hang them all up. And then you have, next to George Innes, you have a Frank Mason, and you have somebody contemporary, and you know, you boy, you could start to see the whole world moving. And
Mm.
I think it would be great, just a huge fun event to see a museum show like that. And I don't think I ever will. Historians don't think that way, but
No,
I think it would be great fun.
it
And
would. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it would be worth maybe convincing a museum to try that out one day, just to see. Um, but yeah, I think what I really love about how you described your process is one one of the first things is obviously a continuation of a legacy that we are continuing as classical painters. That's the one part that I really love. The other part is how you described um almost like the microcosm of a macrocosm sort of thing where we are repeating that creative process in the same way that it has happened in the past, right? We are just that echo
and
of
has
an
and has
ever
happened
creating thing.
has happened all the way back to the creation of the earth, creation
Exactly.
of the universe.
It's this echo that repeats itself and repeats
Yeah.
itself and repeats itself. So
And yet it's
I
always
find that
different.
beautiful.
It's always
Yes.
different. It's
It's
like
always
sunrises,
different. Yep.
you know. And I go out every night with the dog and I watch the moon, and
Mhm.
I've never seen the same moon twice.
Yep.
It's the same thing. The moon rises, the moon goes down, and sometimes it's cloudy and sometimes it's not. But it's different every night. Every night it's different, even though it's the same thing. And I like that idea that we're repeating these same incredible things because they're just so extraordinary. And then,
Yes.
you know, each person will see it in their own way. I mean, my wife is a fabulous painter, and we look at each other's paintings, and when we were younger, I would try and paint more like her, and she would try and paint more like me. And the more we did that, the more we separated and the more different we painted. And my paintings are now totally different from hers. And yet, you know, we can both see the greatness of the other.
Yeah.
And it's just great. There is no single way to paint, which is partly why I don't like a step-by-step process
Mhm.
for myself. Because it's if there's a step-by-step process, then at some point you get it right or you get it wrong.
Yeah.
And, I don't like right and wrong in painting. I like either you've said what you wanted to say and you've expressed it so beautifully that people were moved to tears, or you didn't. And then you have a successful painting or you don't. And but it's just such a beautiful world, and feel so privileged to have been able to do this for 50 years. I went to the Art Students League in 1973, and I've had a brush in my hand for 50 years. And, you know, nothing can replace that. Nothing. No fame, no wealth, no, there's nothing that's more important than just being able to get up in the morning and take a dog through the woods for a walk and come back and sit at your easel with a beautiful light falling on something and pick up your brush and just and watch the painting evolve as you mix your colors and apply them to the canvas, and this world opens up, and where you started out with this blank space, you've brought this whole world into it. It's just so fabulous. Very privileged. It's a
Yeah.
privileged life.
So fascinating too, because it is, in my opinion, a very simple life in a really beautiful way, in a poetic way, almost like a haiku, where it is so precise and so exact, and it's beautiful as it is. And it's very much living in the moment because, like you're saying, every moment is new, every day is new, every sunrise is different. And I feel like painting is how you're describing it is that it is the eternal present, right? Where we're just
Yeah.
experiencing everything as it is in its moment, and that moment just continues. Like there is no future, there's no past, there's just now.
Yeah.
And yeah, oof,
Yeah.
that's very
Yeah.
powerful.
Good stuff.
Yes, good stuff. Very existential.
Good, good stuff. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Which actually it makes me wonder too, because you have had so much experience, like I said earlier, um, and you've had so many students study under you. And it makes me wonder, because earlier you were telling me, before we were recording, how your students each paint very differently, which I love. So it makes me wonder, what do you recommend? What advice would you give to an artist who wants to develop their personal voice?
oh, I'm really, really bad at giving artists advice because I only know my own experience,
Mm,
and my experience, you know, it may not work for the next person, but I would, the one thing that I would probably say, look to the old masters. I said, you've had all of these incredible geniuses before you, and they spent their lifetimes, developing their ideas, and just look at, the early Renaissance, where there was so limited linear perspective, and then it develops, and then later aerial perspective develops, and then new colors come in the 19th century, and there's always these great things, and each artist has to take, all this new knowledge and apply it to their work, and then they learn something else, and you know I think a lot of people will find it boring. They don't really like Del Sarto, but I said, copy his drawings. Copy his drawings. I said, don't, you know, even more than the paintings, because paintings can often be, uh, paintings have a rough life, and sometimes conservators don't treat them kindly, and it's not always what the artist intended. So what you're seeing is the birth, you go to the Uffizi and see the birth of Venus, and it looks exactly like the postcard,
mhm,
which I did I was there with some students, and and I was looking at it, I was explaining, that's not what it's supposed to look like. And then in the center of the same room, there were two small paintings on copper by Botticelli
mhm.
that were untouched, and they had beautiful color and space, and they were incredible. And I said, that's what the big painting is supposed to look like. So instead of copying paintings, go to drawings, because conservators don't do anything to drawings. And they are always, especially the old masters, they were never meant to be seen. They didn't do drawings as product for sale.
Right.
They just did them to develop their ideas. So when you're copying a drawing, you're really getting into the head of the artist, and you're really have a chance to see how they think and how they move, and how their hand move. You can copy every stroke of a drawing and really see how they're thinking. When you see these finished Titians that are so crisp and so beautiful and so finished, then you look at the drawing for it, and you see the pen just moving back along the arm in little spirals as it's going around the form in the shadow. It's like, oh, that's what he's thinking. And I, I'm not the biggest fan of Pontormo's paintings, but his drawings, oh my God, they're so fabulous. And we've got to wrap this up, but I'll give you one little story from Robert Beverly Hale, to go back to my student days. And what he would do he would give a lecture, and it would go for maybe 45 minutes or so, and then he'd take a little break and have a little water, and then he'd come back and he'd teach again for another 45 minutes or so, and then after that he would go back into the back of the room, and the model would stay in the front. He said, those of you that want to draw, you can keep drawing. And those of you who want to watch, come to the back of the room. And we were all drawing on big newsprint pads at that time, big 18 by 24 newsprint pads, and you prop it up against the chair and you're drawing with Vine charcoal. And he didn't care whose drawing it was. He just said, somebody put something up here for me. And so somebody did. And it was a full-length standing figure. And Hal looked at it and he said, I noticed you put a bump on the flank of your figure. Why did you do that? And the student said, well, I saw a bump there, so I drew it. And Hal said, well, you drew a very good bump. And it looks like a bump. He said, as you develop as an artist, you'll realize that bump is actually the external oblique. And it runs from the rib cage down to the pelvis, and it has a form and a function. And he said, when you know that, you'll be able to draw the external oblique with all of its character. And he said, the reason for doing that is not to show off how much anatomy you know, or how smart you are, or how much you've learned. The reason you do that is because it makes your figure look more human. And I thought, what a beautiful thought. What a beautiful thought. So, the reason we're doing all of these things is to make, our people look more human, to make our still lifes look, more delicious. Make the grapes look like something that just came off the vine, to do these things that bring out, the character of each thing that we're painting. But I've always loved that idea, the reason you do it is to make your figure look more human. And still, that was 50 years ago. Still makes my heart beat faster,
Yeah.
To make your
Oh.
figure look more human. How beautiful is that? And he just said it very quietly.
Mhm.
And I don't know if anybody else remembers it, if anybody else heard it, it may have been said just for me. Somebody may have been, my guardian angel might have been behind me, tapping me on the shoulder, said, listen to this.
Yeah.
But I remember that, 50 years. And boy, those things are powerful.
It is.
And he would do that over and over again. I could give you another 20 examples, but he was just a beautiful man, with a beautiful way of thinking. And he wasn't an artist.
Mhm.
He was a historian, and he taught anatomy, but he was the curator at the Metropolitan Museum.
Mhm.
And he's the one who brought in the modern paintings. He's the one who brought in the Jackson Pollocks and those things. And then he would come to the league and teach classical drawing. And for him, it was all, part of the same, as you were talking about, the same motion of time and all these different things happening together. It's just beautiful. So I was very lucky to have such people in my life.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And his book, truly, I completely agree with you. It is a masterpiece of a book
It's a,
for
it's,
anyone.
yeah, it's my Bible.
Yeah.
I, I,
Yeah.
I mean, I must have bought 20 copies because I wear them out and I
Mhm.
spill wine on them and I give them I give them to people but I've copied every drawing in that book more than once. And I did it with the intent of trying to learn the lesson that he was talking about.
Mhm. Wow.
And but I can still hear his voice. You can find them on YouTube. Somebody taped them, they're old black and white
Mhm.
things that were made on tape. This was long before digital stuff,
Yeah.
and you could still find some of his lectures online.
It's amazing.
And yeah, and he would always end every lecture, he would always end with a poem. So so he'd be going along and going along and talking about the structure of the knee and then he would morph into how that would work in a painting and then he would morph into a Kipling poem when Earth's last picture is painted and the tubes are twisted and dried. Oh, it was fabulous. And then when he was
Oh,
finished with the poem, you knew the lecture was over.
wow.
Every time, every
Amazing.
lecture ended with a reciting poetry. Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
speechless.
yeah. We
That's
need more
amazing.
people like that.
We do. We do. I completely agree. I think right now, yeah, thankfully we're having that revival more and more of the
Hmm.
classical training. I mean, I'm an example of it since I was also, at these academies. But yeah, I think finding more people like you and like your teachers who are so passionate about this and just talking to them like I'm talking to you and how our listeners are listening. I think that really makes it so much more inspiring and makes it so much more like we're not alone in our endeavor to create beautiful images that speak to people, right?
Yeah,
Because I feel like that's most of our goal is to create images that speak to people.
yeah. You don't paint for yourself.
No,
You paint to communicate to whoever
to
is
be
is
loved.
open, whoever is open to it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Oh,
you never know where you're going to find that person. I mean,
definitely.
here you are, you've just come along, and the two of us are already best friends
Yeah.
after just a couple of hours being together. And it's because we share this commonality, this passion. And if I can get somebody else to feel that for 10 minutes, that's great. That's great. I don't have to change their entire life. Maybe 400 years from now, somebody will see my still life and have their life changed. But whether that happens or not, if you can, you know, bring some joy to somebody's life for 10 minutes, it's worth all 50 years.
Yes. That human connection
Yeah.
is oof,
Yeah.
that that's at the foundation of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And oh, I think we've done it. I think we've said it
We
all.
have. Yes, we have. Oh man. Well, thank you, Thomas. Where can people see more of your work?
Well, my website, Fine Art Studios Online, thomastorak.com. And from there, um, I started a blog many, many, many years ago when blogs were the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, I would probably do a podcast, but you know, I, I'm just beyond that. But uh, I did a blog for a while, and then there were 30 posts the first year, and then 20, and then 10, and then one every now and then. But lately, I've started picking it up again and just little thoughts about painting. Sometimes they're technical, sometimes they're about the subject, but it's kind of fun. And I call it Dammi I colori. And that's Italian for, give me my palette, give me my colors.
Mm-hmm.
And since you're an opera fan, I can explain to you that's from Tosca.
Yeah.
In the beginning of Tosca, when Mario Cavaradossi, says to the sacristan, Dammi I colori, give me my colors so I can paint the Mary Magdalene. And so I love that. So that was the title of my blog. Other than that, you've just got to go around and check things out. I often have things, if you're in New York, I often have things at the Salmagundi Club.
Oh, fun.
I've been a member of the Salmagundi Club for a very, very long time, and I like sending them paintings from time to time. And my
Yes.
the main gallery is here in Vermont, in Manchester, Vermont, but they're hard to find, you know. The best
You're a
best
rare
place
bird.
best place is my website. Best place is the
Perfect.
website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Thomas, for painting with your words today instead of on your easel, like you normally do. I really appreciate it.
Sometimes you need language instead of paint, but
Yes.
it's this was great. You're wonderful, and you just let me go wherever I wanted to go, which is rare.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
I love it. It's like
well,
walking through a forest.
there you go. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yes.
Great.
Well,
Thank you, Laura.
thank you.